I can't literally speak audio out loud, but here is your text formatted exactly for narration, ready for TTS or voiceover reading. What does it really mean to be free when you are already living in a world that promises freedom? Why do so many people feel trapped, even when nothing physical is holding them back? And what kind of truth has the power to change something deeper than circumstances, something inside the human heart? The tension in Jerusalem had not disappeared. The conversations about Jesus continued to grow more intense, more divided, more personal. Some believed, some doubted, some resisted. But now Jesus turns to those who had begun to believe in him, and he speaks words that would become some of the most well-known statements in the entire passage. If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. It is a simple sentence, but it carries depth, because it shifts focus from hearing to holding, from listening to remaining, from momentary interest to lasting connection. There is a difference between being near truth and staying with truth, and Jesus is drawing attention to that difference. He continues, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This is the statement that stands at the center of this passage, a promise of freedom, but not the kind of freedom the world often imagines. At first hearing, it sounds simple. Truth leads to freedom, but the people listening respond with confusion. They say, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Their response reveals something important. They are thinking in physical terms, political terms, historical terms. They are thinking about external freedom. But Jesus is speaking about something deeper, something internal, something spiritual. And that gap between understanding is where the message becomes powerful. Jesus responds, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." That statement reframes the entire conversation, because now freedom is no longer about external conditions. It is about internal condition. A person can be physically free and still feel bound, and a person can be physically restricted, yet spiritually free. Jesus is pointing to something most people overlook. The unseen chains, the internal patterns, the habits, fears, and brokenness that shape human behavior. He continues, "Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever." Here the contrast becomes even clearer. Slave versus son, temporary versus permanent, ownership versus belonging. Jesus is describing identity, not just behavior. Because freedom is not only about what you escape, it is also about where you belong. And belonging changes everything. Then he says something that ties the entire message together. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Not partially free, not temporarily free, but truly free. This raises a question that goes deeper than language. What does truly free mean? Because many people define freedom as the ability to do whatever they want. But that kind of freedom often leads to new forms of bondage, addiction, regret, isolation, confusion. Jesus is pointing to a different kind of freedom. Freedom from sin's control, freedom from internal captivity, freedom that changes not just actions, but identity. As Jesus continues speaking, the tone becomes more serious. He begins to address the deeper issue behind the resistance he is facing. "I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you are looking for a way to kill me because you have no room for my word." This is a difficult statement because it reveals a contradiction. They claim heritage, but reject truth. They claim identity, but resist transformation. Jesus is not denying their background, he is exposing their response, because heritage alone does not determine spiritual openness. He continues, "I am telling you what I have seen in the Father's presence, and you are doing what you have heard from your father." This creates confusion among the listeners. They respond by claiming Abraham as their father. But Jesus challenges that assumption. He says, "If you were Abraham's children, then you would do what Abraham did." This is not about lineage alone, it is about alignment. Abraham is known for faith and obedience, but the current response to Jesus shows resistance. That contrast reveals something deeper. Spiritual identity is not just inherited, it is reflected in action. Then Jesus takes the conversation to its deepest point. He says, "You belong to your father the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires." This is one of the most intense statements in the passage, but it is not spoken to insult. It is spoken to expose alignment. Because Jesus is revealing that there are only two directions in spiritual identity: truth or deception, life or destruction, freedom or slavery. And the difference is not always obvious on the surface. It is revealed through response to truth. He continues, describing the nature of the contrast. The enemy, he says, was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, because he is a liar and the father of lies. This description is not abstract. It is a diagnosis of spiritual deception, and it reveals why truth is so important in this passage. Because truth is not just information, it is liberation. It breaks deception, it exposes lies, it restores clarity. Jesus then asks a simple but powerful question. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? It is not a challenge born of pride. It is a challenge born of clarity, because truth stands on its own integrity. And yet belief is not always automatic, even when truth is present. Jesus explains, whoever belongs to God hears what God says. That statement introduces a key principle. Recognition follows relationship. Those who are open to truth hear it differently, not because the message changes, but because the listener is receptive. And then he concludes, the reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. This is not exclusion in a simple sense, it is explanation. It reveals that hearing truth is not only about sound, it is about spiritual alignment. At this point in the passage, the tension is fully visible. Some are listening, some are resisting, some are offended, some are considering, and all are being confronted with a question that cannot be ignored. What is truth, and how do we respond to it? Jesus' promise, the truth will set you free, is not a slogan. It is a declaration of transformation. But transformation requires engagement, not passive hearing, but active holding. Hold to my teaching, he said earlier. That holding implies endurance, continuity, commitment beyond initial reaction, because truth is not only something to hear once. It is something to remain in, and remaining changes identity. The passage also reveals something subtle but important. Freedom is not described as independence from everything. It is dependence on truth. That is a different kind of freedom. Not isolation, but alignment. Not self-direction, but clarity of direction. And that clarity removes internal conflict, because many forms of human struggle come from contradiction within. Truth resolves that contradiction. Not by removing challenges externally, but by realigning the heart internally. As the conversation continues, the division among listeners becomes more apparent. Some reject the message completely, others question, others begin to understand, but none remain unaffected. Because truth, once encountered, demands response, and response shapes direction. The central message of this passage is not just about freedom, it is about source of freedom. Jesus does not say truth in general sets people free. He says the truth in connection with his teaching. Because truth is not just abstract, it is revealed in relationship with him. And that relationship determines whether freedom becomes reality or remains idea. This distinction is important because many people seek freedom in different ways, through achievement, through independence, through escape from pressure. But Jesus is pointing to a deeper freedom. Freedom that begins with truth and continues in truth. A freedom that is sustained, not temporary. A freedom that changes identity, not just circumstances. As the passage unfolds, the contrast between bondage and freedom becomes clearer, between deception and truth, between belonging and separation, and between hearing and truly understanding. Jesus is not speaking to condemn, he is speaking to reveal, because revelation is the first step toward liberation. But it requires acceptance, and acceptance requires humility, willingness to see differently, willingness to reconsider assumptions, willingness to stay with truth even when it challenges comfort. That is what holding to my teaching means. Not just agreement, but perseverance. As the passage draws toward its close, the tension remains unresolved. Some accept, some reject, some struggle, but all are invited, because the invitation is not removed by misunderstanding. It remains present, and it continues to speak beyond the moment. The truth will set you free, but only when it is held. Not observed from distance, not occasionally considered, but lived in. As Jesus speaks, he is not offering information alone. He is offering transformation. And transformation always begins with truth. Truth that reveals, truth that confronts, truth that liberates. and truth that invites a decision. Hold to it, remain in it, and let it reshape what freedom truly means. Because according to Jesus, freedom is not just what you escape, it is who you become. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to your heart, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs encouragement today.